This lab is going to deal with adding lighting and cameras to your scene. And this is the sample file that you're going to open to start with, lighting and cameras. And take a moment actually just to get comfortable with the scene. You'll see it set up almost like a film studio. It's set, and there's a room, a little teddy bear, a little desk and computer, a lamp. There's quite a few objects, so you might also take a minute and look at scene collection area in the outliner. And it's pretty well organized, actually. There's one scene for the overall interior. Then you'll see additional collections for things like the room structure, room items. So that's well organized. And I can tell actually from these little icons a little bit about what's inside each scene collection. For example, there's 12 meshes in room structure, and I can see that there's an additional collection as well as objects inside room items. So we can pop that open and get more information. Looks like computer is the other little sub collection inside room items. So a lot of pieces, but you've learned to make shapes like this actually in your prior labs. And you also, at this stage, are familiar with creating materials to apply things like color. By the way, you can kind of get comfortable in the file too. I want to point out that you can adjust the width of this panel. So if you want to make it a little smaller or wider to fit your monitor, you can. And my materials section is open right here, but don't forget you can go into other buttons to get into other sections and properties. And so far in our labs, we've worked with object properties, where you're seeing measurements. We've worked with modifiers. And in the most recent lab, we worked with adding materials. The preview looks kind of huge, so sometimes I toggle that close to look at other information. So once you're comfortable, let's go back into our lab goal and discussing what we're going to be doing in this project. So you can imagine if this was a set built for a movie studio or TV show, they would need cameras and lighting. And you might think of a camera as a way to record all the action. It's kind of the view for the director. It's a view for the audience. So we're going to see that you can add a camera inside Blender to control images that are rendered from the scene. And first we're going to need to add lights though. Right now everything looks kind of flat and it's previewed. Up here I'm previewing materials. So if we look at the little icons in the upper right corner, I want to remind you that you can change how you're viewing your Blender file. So for example, I can go into wireframe view. I can view things just shaded. That's usually a good view for modeling objects. And then most recently, you've learned to go into our object properties and learn about material properties. And we're in the material view. Well, there's one more button I want to click over for a moment into our render view. And it's funny, the room looks very dark, but it's just because we don't have lights that are added in this view yet. So that's our next mission, is we're going to start to add lighting, and we'll see that Blender offers the ability to add different types of light that can really mimic real world situations. If you'd like to change your view options quickly, instead of clicking these little circular buttons, there's a really simple shortcut where you just hit Z. And when I hit Z, it'll pop up with these little options. They're basically buttons. It's kind of cute here, the little circular thing, but really I just want to be able to choose my view. So I can click things like wireframe. I can hit Z again and go back to rendered view, the dark room. I hit Z one more time. Material preview. So again, the letter Z, like zebra, is just a quick way to pop open little buttons if you want to use a different way to move around. I think I'll go back to the rendered view at this stage. Well, I'm going to stay in the render view for a little while so I can see lighting as I work. And the next thing I'm going to do is actually add an overall light. And I want to point out that in the scene collection area, there's already an empty new collection set up for lights and cameras, and it's separate from the objects, which is a good way to organize your work. So I recommend choosing the lights and camera collection at this stage, and then when we add lights, they'll fall into that collection easily, or you can drag them if you want to move them around later. And then to actually add lights, we're going to go up to the add menu, and we've been in here before adding meshes, but if you go a little further down, you'll see add light, and there's 4 different types of lights that we're going to explore. It's also interesting to think you can add more than one light. It kind of makes sense. There could be more than one lamp in a room, for example, or a movie studio can use multiple lights for different effects. And what we're going to do is add an overall light to start with that kind of mimics the sun. So let's go back into add light and choose sun to start with. And I saw an immediate change. The room looks brighter, and sometimes a little hard to see what's going on, but there's kind of a yellow line and a sun icon in the center of the origin there. It's a little hard to see because it's right on top of my cursor, but I'm going to just change view a little bit and let you see that there is like an icon there and a line, and a yellow dot is kind of special control. It's also showing up here as an object. So for example, I can hide it from view. I'm dragging my mouse wheel, by the way, to easily orbit and move around and rotate. Just as a reminder, you can drag the gizmo area too, kind of in between the letters to do the same thing. So it's basically an object, and you can manipulate it with some of your familiar tools. First thing I want to do is get the sun off the floor. I want to bring it up higher so it feels like it's roughly in the middle of the room to create an overall light. So for example, I'll just make sure it's selected in my collection area, and then I'm going to choose the move tool, and I want to move it straight up, basically. Let me go ahead and reselect, and I'm using the collection area, and I see the yellow line highlighted, so I see it selected. And then what I'm going to do is just pull my blue line, blue arrow, to move this straight up. Maybe roughly in the middle of the room is a good position for it. Don't forget, you can navigate and kind of move around to view this in different ways while you're working. You can also hide it and see what that looks like with kind of like the sun turned on or off. So it's interesting that you can add multiple lights. I'll also show you a feature. I think maybe I'll zoom in a little closer by rolling the mouse wheel. Just want to be able to see the room better. The light is kind of emanating from the top icon here. Select it again. But I want to point out that there's this little yellow circle that's a special control handle. And the idea is if you want the light to be less evenly distributed, if you want it to feel like it's coming at an angle, you can take this little interactive point and drag it towards objects. So I'm just going to try it out. So if I pull that, it's kind of like an extra handle. Maybe we can imagine for a second that the sun was late in the day, and maybe these long shadows are being created by the sun going down over the horizon. So sort of as a general idea, you can take that little circle and you point towards something. It's almost like you're aiming the light to it. So sort of move it around. Now in my case, I want this to feel more like kind of overhead lighting, almost a general light. So I think instead of aiming it towards an object, I'm going to pull it more straight down. Maybe it feels again a little bit more like overhead light in the room. And then we have properties. So there's a little light bulb icon for our light properties. And as long as you have that selected, you'll be able to make changes to it. So let me just select one more time. I'm done with the move tool, by the way. Maybe I'll just move to select because the preview is a little easier to see that now. And I want to explore some of our properties. I'm going to make this preview smaller, or I can collapse it. And there's a number of settings here. The primary one that I want to focus on at the moment is strength. And you can go from 1 to 10 in this range. So mine's set at 1 right now. So this is pretty obvious. This is controlling how strong that light is. How much light do you want to have? And by the way, we're going to add more than one light, so we don't have to maybe illuminate everything with just a single light. So you can adjust the strength, and then we're going to explore more lights. And we'll write it one more time that you can change the view. So sometimes if I'm working on objects, I'll go back to some of our prior views and just see things like shading. If I want to see colors, I'll go back to the material preview. And now you're seeing you have a render preview, which is going to be ideal for working with lighting. By the way, one other setting you might look at in your light properties is the fact that you can turn shadows on and off. To me, it looks more realistic to see that these objects are casting shadows based on the sun that I added. But I just want to point out you can uncheck shadows if you just want a flat appearance. I think it adds a lot of realism though, so I'm going to go ahead and turn shadow back on. And then there are some additional settings. Just to give one example, I can adjust fade, and it's softening a little bit. It's affecting the transition from the shadow. And then there's a maximum distance for shadows. So maybe I'll increase mine a little bit or set a limit. The next step is we'll start to add more lights. So I'm going to go over to the add menu, light, and let's try an additional light. This time I'm going to choose point light and try to simulate something like an overhead light bulb. Let's choose point. And by the way, I think it actually dropped under the floor. I think the first time I dropped this in on the scene, I thought, I don't see the light. What's happening? But weirdly, the floor is like a little bit above the point of origin in the it looks funny, but the light is in the basement. It's under the floor. Let's just move it up higher. And again, I want to try to simulate an overhead room light. And if you need to, you can move the sun up higher if you want to have a little bit more room for the separate lights. So you can always check that it's selected in the collection area. And then I'm going to grab my move tool, and let me grab that blue arrow and just pull straight up. It's funny, if it's close to the floor, I see a little bit of light emanating from it, but it feels somewhat weak. So let me just lift it a little bit higher in my room. And then let's go and adjust the settings in your properties. And the key option for this one to strengthen it is going to be power. And it's actually labeled in watts. So they are thinking of this as being similar to a light bulb. So 10 watts is pretty low. I think on this one, I'll just double click and type in different values. So maybe try 500 watts, and you can hit enter or return. Now I'm seeing an impact where there's kind of a glow. It's emanating from that particular location. You can adjust it. Like if it's lower in the room, it's casting shadows up. But I'm just going to pull it up a little bit. So again, it feels like I've turned on the overhead light bulb, you could say. In addition to the sun, we're getting more complex shadows at this stage, which is interesting because I have multiple light sources, just like real life. And you can play with power. What if I went to 2000? And then it's really flooded with light. I think I actually like the way it looked at 500, so I'm going to set it back to that value. And then we'll continue adding more lights to our scene of different types. There was 4 different types. We want to actually try each one in our project. Our next light will bring alive this lamp. I'm going to use an area light, which is a good light source if you want to mimic something that's pointing in a direction. So we're going to literally try to put a light bulb inside the lamp. So I've moved to my select tool and I've already deselected the other light. And then let's go ahead and add a new light. I'm going to add light. And this time we're going to try area. And then it might be below that floor. Let's just bring it straight up right away. I'm going to go to move tool and pull the blue arrow to start to drag it up. And what's unique about this one is that it's pointing in a certain direction. I want to try to bring it so that it's inside the lamp. And I think I'll drag on the white circle. That'll allow me to move in any direction, X, Y, or Z. And I'm going to try to get it over in that area. And then let me view this more of an overhead view. And then I can position it inside better. You can actually even see it happening and illuminating that interior area as I move it inside. Then let me view it like this, or don't forget I could be clicking these buttons to get a pure flat view if you wanted to see one side, or I've been dragging with the mouse wheel to get a little more three-dimensional perspective. It does help to change your view frequently while you're working though. So I'm just going to move this so the light bulb is a little bit more like inside the shade. Then I'll get in a little closer. So we zoom in, and I'm going to move my view by dragging the hand for a second, just to center that, and then I'll kind of tip it. So it looked really weird, but the light is literally inside there, and it's casting light down. Let's go over and adjust settings. This one also has power. It's measured in watts as well. So you can start to brighten that up. I think actually I'll just double click and type in 500 and hit enter. So the light is affected by other objects and it has a direction to it. I believe it's casting down already by default, but to get more control, this one also has a little interactive yellow dot that you can work with to change the direction. So for example, if I start to grab that and point, it's causing the light to act like it's pointing in that direction. And I think it actually looked more realistic, sort of straight down. So maybe I'll just undo that last step. And you can experiment with power as much as you like over there. One other feature you could try out is changing the color of the light. What if I had a groovy light bulb that was pink? Or you want to even do subtle things. Some light bulbs try to mimic warm tones or cool tones or daylight. So if you click right on the color field, it does pop open with a little color box. And you can experiment like they're making the light colder. So it's casting tones of blue. I actually like a warm light, so I think I'm going to set mine to kind of a pink or peach. And I can change the view so we're not staring directly at the light bulb, looking a little bit more at how that's impacting the room itself. So try adding color along with changing your power. Then I'll switch, by the way, to my select tool, and we're going to be adding one more light. I'd like to focus attention on the teddy bear. And sometimes we add a spotlight and use it to light a particular object or create emphasis on a character that we think is important in the scene. This is our fourth light type to try out. So let's go to add light, and we're going to be using spotlight. And by the way, the tooltips on these are trying to give you a little bit of information about the different light types. This one is describing it as a directional cone. light source, as opposed to something like sun, it describes as a constant direction light source. So those tool tips give you a little bit of a description. Let me go ahead and add that in. So I'm adding a spot, and it might also be under the floor. So go ahead and go to your move tool right away and drag that blue arrow to lift it up. And this one has a couple extra icons on it. Primarily the blue arrow is unique to this one. And if I start to drag that, it's changing the cone. It's either making it a little larger area or more focused. So that's what's unique about the spotlight. And then it also has the interactive yellow dot handle to point in a direction. Right now it's pointing down, but I want to direct it to the teddy bear itself, the character. So in addition to pulling it up higher, why don't you grab the yellow dot and point to the teddy bear itself. And then you can go over and adjust power. This one's also measured in watts. So I think I'll try 500 watts and see how that looks. Well, I think I really got the teddy bear. You can see his shadow in the circular shape hit the wall there. Now that the power is a little stronger, I can go back up and adjust it and move it around. It's funny, it is almost like using a flashlight and pointing at objects. And I can also work with height, and see if it's kind of in the right area. And then I'll switch to the select tool and just deselect. So our room, it's starting to come together. It's looking a little bit more like a real room. And you're starting to see that you have a lot of different choices with lights. We tried all 4 types, and you can actually insert as many lights as you need. The next thing we're going to do is try a material. We may find that you have some objects that glow or emanate their own light. A good example would be a cell phone that's illuminating your face, having light cast from it directly. In this case, there's a computer monitor. So that might be an object where the screen itself should have a glow to it with maybe a certain color to it, like a greenish blue color emanating from it. So to handle things like that, we're going to see that you can create a material that actually has light coming from it. So let's focus on the computer monitor. I'm going to zoom in a little closer, maybe change my view a little bit. And I'll remind you that we learned to create materials for objects in some of our prior labs. Like this chair has material applied to it, and I'm viewing it under material properties. And we applied color in prior labs, and usually the surface has been something like a diffuse surface, like a chair. It's not glowing. But I want to show you that there's a special material that you can use that has a surface that's designed for things that emit light, called emission. One other reminder is that this object is going to actually have multiple materials, and we dealt with that in the rubric cube in one of the prior labs. And some of the work's been done for you. There's already a material created for the base that's been applied to the overall object. That's basically just this gray color, and it's diffuse. And then I want to remind you that it's possible to hit plus to create additional material slots that can be assigned to areas. So that step has actually already been done. There is one additional material called glowing screen. And then it's not assigned yet. So at this stage, what we'll need to do is choose the monitor and then go into edit mode so that we can select individual faces. Double check that yours is set to face select and you're in the select tool. And then you can choose the face of the screen and then go over to your material section. And all we need to do at this point is once that area is selected, you can choose the second material and then hit assign to make sure it is applied. And then let's take a look at it. This was created in advance. It was already in the file, but I want to draw you down into the settings that you're seeing. The biggest one is the surface. So if we click here, there's a list of many options. So it would say kind of typical objects that we've worked with so far just had a diffuse look to it, where they're not glowing or anything, but they can have a color assigned. But what's happening is we'll go into surface and use emission, and it's perfect for things, again, that emit light and glow, like screens, televisions, and computer monitors. And then you can click color. There's sort of like a bluish color assigned to this, but you can adjust that, see what you think feels natural. I think like a greenish blue kind of. And then you can work with strength also to control how strong the glow is. I want it to be there, but not overwhelming. And then that's it. I'm finished applying that material to that section, so I can switch back to object mode, and maybe I'll deselect by either clicking a blank area, or I can use the shortcut Alt A or Option A to deselect everything. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's actually glowing, so you can see the color around it in the rendered view, and it's affecting neighboring objects that are near, pretty close to it. It's not as strong as these other lights. So at this point, you are finished lighting the scene, and we're going to turn to talking about adding and controlling a camera and rendering images. Kind of thinking like, what viewpoint would you like to render from? What would show off your character and setting the best? And we're going to control that through cameras, just like the metaphor of working with a film studio or recording environment. Now that you've added lighting to your scene, we can put in a camera and control its viewpoint. And just to show you what it could look like, I've added a camera, and I want to just show the result. I'm going to use the toggle button here, where you can go back and forth between your current view and how the camera actually sees the world. And the camera is really important because when we render images, they come from the camera view. Also, if you get involved with animation later, you're recording the animation as if it's through a certain camera. So again, I'm using this toggle button, and I kind of cheated. I quickly put in a camera so you could see an example of what it might look like. I'm going to zoom out for a little bit. This icon here with a triangle represents the camera itself, and it's also an object right now for me, so I can select it and actually use things like the move or rotate tool to control position. Let me kind of backtrack because I want to have you insert a camera too. So let me actually just hit delete to remove that one, and we'll start fresh. And you can go up to add camera, much like we've added lights. And it's originating at the point of origin. So right now it's like a little bit below the floor. And I think the first thing I'll do is start to use move or rotate tool to position it. Zoom out a little bit. It's funny, it's awkward when it's down there. And I can select it also in this view again, and I'm going to use move tool and start to pull it straight up. It'll be a little easier to manipulate. So this is the actual camera. I can move it closer or further away to my objects. And like our other objects, I can change view to see it in different positions. Let me move around the world a little bit. So I can lift my camera a little higher up. And then I'm going to zoom out and pull it a little further away. Now, it also points right now. I think mine is maybe pointing to the desk. I can check that view by starting to use the toggle button. So we toggle back out with the camera button. So you can use rotate to turn it. I'd like to include the desk, maybe the teddy bear, also important areas of the scene. So just make sure camera is selected, and then I'm going to choose rotate and start to turn it as I drag on it. And then I can keep checking the view with the toggle switch, and I can view in different directions as well. This one's kind of still pointing at the floor. So let me go back to rotate and start to turn that in a few different directions. And then I'll show you a little trick. Sometimes I do some movements in the camera view. So I do have camera selected. Let me toggle it so I'm actually seeing its real viewpoint. And I can open up rotate settings down in the corner here and manipulate them here. And this is kind of interesting because it's more of a live experience. So there it looks like I'm tilting the world. And you can choose different axis points to work with. So maybe I can choose the X axis and then work with turning it another direction. I also sometimes zoom in or out with the mouse wheel. And as long as I'm in the camera view, it is adjusting the viewpoint. So I think what I'll actually do is sort of a wider view. And then I'm going to hit the camera button and kind of toggle back and forth a little bit between its view and seeing the world in my last view. If I zoom out right now, you can see the camera is further out. That because I used the mouse wheel while I was in that view, it's essentially moved it further away. And then we also have camera settings. While this is selected, I can go over into properties and start to make some adjustments, a lot like a real camera. You'll see things like focal length that can affect our view. Let's change the focal length just like you're changing a real lens and see how it affects your view. So instead of 50 millimeter, let me try 35 millimeter. And it's as if I am able to have a wider view, see more in the scene. Let's try going back to 50 millimeter. It feels like I'm tighter. Let's go even closer, like changing to 80 millimeter lens. And it's really a tight view. I think actually 50 was nice in this one. And then let me go ahead and toggle back in and out of the view of the camera, and let me zoom out so you can actually see the camera. So it's actually affecting the shape of this as you adjust your focal length. Like if I go to 35 millimeter here, you can see the camera icon actually change. So that's interesting. I like the way it looked at 50 millimeter. So let me go ahead and reset it to that view, and then I'll just check it with the camera icon. I think that's getting everything I think is important. Another setting that's interesting to tinker with is depth of field. In traditional cameras, some areas might appear out of focus, some might appear sharper. So you can actually set a focal distance that's indicating the distance to objects that are most in focus. There may be some that are closer or further away that appear out of focus. This is set to 10 meters at the moment, but you can start to experiment with it. And just for fun, what if I set it to only 1 meter? And you can see that's actually causing almost my entire scene to blur because my camera is much farther than a meter from these objects. I just thought it's nice to see a dramatic change. So you could experiment with that. 5 meters, I still actually have a lot of blur on the main objects. So it's still kind of looking at how far away from your objects is your camera. What's the distance there? So maybe the 10 meter was accurate. I can go back and reset that and preview it while I'm in the camera view. So there's actually a lot of settings in here that mimic real world cameras. It's kind of interesting. The closer you look at the settings in here. And then the next thing we're going to do is see that you can render images based on this camera view. So I think at this point, it looks like the position looks fine to me, and I'm ready to move into rendering. I'd like to see how this image would look rendered. So I'm going to go ahead and go up to the render menu, and I'm going to pick render image here. And it generated a picture basically from the scene. It's opened up a new window, by the way, to let that throw you. It's on top of my main window, or I could resize this if I like. And I can see things more clearly in the rendered image and save files from this window. But I think it might be nice if we added maybe one more light to create a color on the teddy bear. So it's nice to preview the render and then work on the file a little bit further. So I think we could add one more light and add a color to it, and then come back and save images. I also might want multiple pictures. Like, this is a pretty good overall shot of the room, but I think it would be nice to render an image of the teddy bear as well. So just for the moment, I'll go ahead and just X out of this to close that. So sometimes I'm, again, going up to render image to preview, get more information, and work on it a little bit further. And then in a moment, I'll go back up there and show you how to save out files. So let's leave the camera view. And again, I was thinking it might be nice to add another light just to add color and give us a little bit more attention to the teddy bear. So we can add a little bit of color with some of the lighting. You might remember that we did that with the lamp and put in a warm tone. And sometimes it's nice to add warm colors to human figures or characters. Like maybe a medium orange color might be nice to add mood lighting to the little teddy bear. You know, and actually, maybe instead of adding a new light, I'll just add color to the spotlight that we created earlier. So I'm going to select that in the scene collection area. And just like we did the lamp, let's click on color and warm it up a little bit. Oops, I think I'm on my lamp. Let me go back and select, let's see. There we go, the spotlight. And then I'll adjust that for the teddy bear. I think I was actually on the teddy bear. Get my lights mixed up. So it's interesting on people and faces, having a warm color to it can add a lot. And then you may also just want an emotional tone, or maybe you're telling a story, like your character's in front of a campfire. So you might think about how color could work for you on individual areas of your project. So this one, after trying a lot of different colors, I think warming it is the most pleasing. And then I want to take one more look at it through the camera. I think that's going to work. And then we'll go ahead and save out a rendered image. So this time I'll go back to render image. And I'll take another look at it. It does look quite a bit better to see the warm tones there. So I'm satisfied with this. And so to save it from here, I can go up to the image menu and I'll choose save here. And then you can turn in this image. I'm going to call it warm light. And I'll save it right into my folder. And then I can close this window. Don't forget, it's open this on top of my working area. It's a separate window when I'm rendering, so you can close that after saving it or viewing. I'm going to organize my camera in the scene collection area. It's here, but I think it'd be more organized if I drag it up into the lights and camera section. And then you can name cameras, and you can even add more than one to collect different views. This is a pretty good overall room view, but I think it'd be nice to have a separate view that we could save that's a close up of the teddy bear. So let me first just go ahead and double click and give this a camera a name. I'm going to call it the wild shot camera, or overall shot. And then the whole idea is that you can insert an additional camera and use it for a different purpose. So let me just toggle out of my camera view. So I have this one located there, and then I want another camera that's a little more focused on the teddy bear. So just like you did earlier, you can go to the add menu to insert additional cameras, just like you can have additional lights. And then I'm going to go ahead and double click this one, and I'm going to call it close up. And I'll drag it into the same collection with the other lights and cameras. And then I'll use my move tool, and I'll start to think about where I want to position this one. And I'm going to start with the idea that I want it to be a close-up camera and kind of directed to the teddy bear. So I'm going to just move it a little bit closer, higher up. And then I can start to toggle that view. And it's each camera at this point will have its own settings, so I can control them by selecting in the scene collection and adjusting settings. Like maybe it's better to have 35 millimeter for the close-up camera. So try to position that one, and then you're going to save out a separate view. So you can render multiple images from different viewpoints by having multiple cameras. I've been trying to preview the new camera, but what's actually happening right now is when I'm clicking here, it's previewing the wild shot camera. So what we need to do at this stage is actually go to your scene properties and tell it which camera you're going to render from. So I can have multiple cameras, but I can only render or view one at a time in Blender. So that might have been frustrating, is even though I was trying to preview the camera, I was actually seeing the wild shot camera. So to fix that, let's go to scene properties icon, and you can see which camera you're currently using at the moment. And it is recognizing I have a second camera, so I can click in the menu and switch over to close-up. Now I really am previewing it. So maybe I'll make some adjustments. I'm going to move out a little bit. Maybe I'll use the move tool and pull it up a little bit. Then I can toggle back out one more time. And let me pull the camera up a little higher here. And then I'll check its preview. So now I'm getting a more accurate preview. And I'm actually able to even adjust it live with the move settings down here. So that looks fine to me. I'm going to go ahead and render the teddy bear from this view. Well, actually, maybe I'll take the camera. Let me adjust it just one more time. And then we can render this, and you're going to save a second picture that we can call close-up teddy bear. And don't forget that it was important to go to scene properties to control which camera is being used, so that when you preview or render, only one at a time is being used, even though there's multiples in the document. And then I can go back to render image at this stage and see the close-up, and I'm going to go ahead and save that as a separate image. So go up to image, save, and I'm going to call this one teddy bear close-up. And then I'll close the render window. And I think at this point, I'm going to switch back to the overall camera and then continue working on the project. So I'm still in scene collection. I can switch to the wild shot camera. And at this point, I think I'll toggle back out of the camera view. So this was a really good lab. I hope that this gives you a lot of ideas in your project about adding emission materials, different types of lighting, and even more than one camera to control your rendered image. And that's it. That's the end of the lab.